Okay. Welcome, everyone. Glad you joined us tonight for Meg and my deep dive that we'll be talking about relationship health and attachment styles. And there is so much information to cover on this topic. And I promise you will get an email with lots of links of different things to listen to and read, because as Meg and I were looking at our 30-ish pages of notes and knowing we're not going to be able to quite probably cover everything we'd like to, we're really excited to cover this information because it impacts us all. We were all children once. We know that without a doubt. We were all children, and how we were parented does affect how we relate to ourselves and others the rest of our lives. So we're excited to talk to everybody about this and give you food for thought and hopefully some information to walk away with to help your relationships in the present. So I'm Erin Hines, therapist and owner here at Lifeline Solutions. So I hang out on most of these deep dives, and I'm super happy to be accompanied by Meg Magnuson. So Meg, what would you say before we get started?
Yes, well, first, again, welcome everybody. If you don't know me, my name is Meg Magnuson, and I'm a therapist and health coach with Lifeline. And yes, Erin and I tag team these deep dives each month just to kind of unpack a topic that we're interested in that really just helps our sort of healing and wellness journey. And yeah, for this one, I was sending messages earlier. I was like, I feel like we could do 3 deep dives just on this alone. Hopefully, we can all get some tidbits out of it. And then when it's finished, we'll have the resources like, this really interests me. This makes a lot of sense. I want to learn more of different like books and podcasts. And this will be recorded and available for you for later if you just want to take notes or, have it resonate more. So yeah, I'm ready.
All right, great. So why are we talking about attachment? When we are brought into this world by our parents, we have a survival. We all want to survive. We all have this biological imperative to want to be able to fit into our herd and survive. And so our little family that we're brought into, for better or for worse, is who we want to try to survive with. And so in attachment theory, basically, we are willing to do whatever adaptations we have to make in order to survive our existence. And so depending on how our family looked and behaved and interacted, we are, as young infants, are figuring out, what do I do? How do I get my food, my shelter, my needs met? Because if I don't, I'm not going to survive. So do I need to cry louder? Does that get me attention? Do I need to not cry at all? Because does that make everybody mad and nobody wants to be around me? So as an infant, you're beginning to develop this understanding about how to get what you need in the world and how to connect with the caregivers that are ultimately going to be responsible for keeping you alive. So, throughout life then, this way that we related in that early attachment gets encoded, embedded, and then often drives how we're going to relate in friendships and partnerships and romantic relationships and really all relationships, because that child part of us and that really brain and biological and neurological development that happens so early in life in our nervous system, in our early formed stored memories, kind of is that book guide to here's how you're going to relate to others. It worked, and when I say it worked, it worked in that you're still alive. So even if it was maladaptive coping, maybe you say, even if I had to do some things that I don't like how I do it, it worked. So if it worked then, it must work in the future. That's just what our instinct is, to just keep doing what I've always done so that I can continue to be okay, even though okay may not be healthy or happy. So the part, I think that's just in introducing this, there's correct me if I'm wrong, Meg, I feel like it was 70s or 80s. I think early 70s is when Bowlby kind of first began this attachment work and attachment theory. And I feel like every book and every podcast we've listened to about this talks about Bowlby and Ainsworth's research that looked at how infants related to mothers. And in the research, something that we'll talk about tonight between anxious and avoidant attachments with the insecure attachment styles is that when mothers would leave the room, babies would either cry or not. But what they found was that the stress level, after the mother came back in and the babies are engaged, and then they looked at their stress and cortisol levels, was high amongst everybody. So as we talk some tonight about the anxious and the avoidant, even if a person's shut down, whether a person's anxious in their attachment, their level of distress without being in proximity to the person that they're in connection with is highly dysregulated and creates a lot of cortisol, other, reactions to stress that is measurable. And so thinking about the dysregulated state that happens when we're not with the person that we're supposed to be in connection with is really been studied for years. And so attachment theory, I feel like, has kind of gotten popular over the years. Many of you maybe thought about it if you have your own children when you were parenting, you might have thought about attachment styles and how do I create secure attachments. But that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight, why we are the way we are, what these categories are, what types there are, and then how to work towards secure attachment. So that's kind of the introduction overview, and I probably botched some of that. So Meg, what would you add?
No, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Yeah. I mean, it's really this understanding of how do we show up in relationships? Are we someone who maybe tends to shut down? Like there's even just like when people come closer as we shut down and we sort of freeze. Are we someone who feels more clingy and like we're insecure in the relationships? Is it kind of a mix of both? And really kind of understanding how those earliest childhood experiences with our caregivers, if they were present and engaged and were able to kind of help us regulate, because as babies we can't even self-regulate, and if they weren't, shows up, the whole idea of like our body helps us understand what attachment styles we are. So I think for this next piece is kind of maybe bringing up the 4 attachment styles, and we can kind of break those down, because right now it may sound a little abstract, but kind of break them down on what it looks like. And it's not that we only have one. You might see yourself in all of them, and then be able to understand. It may even be in some relationships I show up as avoidant, in some relationships I show up as anxious, in some relationships I show up as secure, and it just kind of helps you see how you flow in and out of it.
Perfect. If you're okay, I think I want to just show this handout for a moment, and we'll put this in our show notes too. You okay with that, Meg?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay. So can y'all see that?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think it can just kind of help to have a visual representation and thinking about these attachment styles. So we're either secure attachment or insecure attachment. And so you might begin to look at some of these and say, where am I checking off the most bullet points in this box? I'll cover a couple of them, Meg, if you want to. Maybe I'll talk about the insecure initially, this dismissive or avoidant attachment style, where this is the person that is emotionally distant. This concept of low feeler, high dealer, the low feeler, they don't express emotion. So this is the kind of quiet, cold person that's kind of calculated, very left brain, very just looking ahead, not really getting caught up, avoiding conflict, avoiding intimacy. They don't trust, and they withdraw to avoid the interaction. One of the podcasts I listened to talked about that this would be a low effort, low reward, like they're not putting much in and they're not getting much out, and they're really avoiding and not risking getting hurt by this avoidant attachment style. So really just kind of that closed off and shut down. And this anxious attachment style is where the person is very sensitive and seeking a lot of connection and willing to kind of put themselves out there over and over and over to try to connect. So they're afraid of abandonment. They're very high effort, low reward. They're very focused on, what do I have to do to make this connection work? What do I have to do to make this connection work? So they're constantly reaching out if they're being ignored, trying to get the connection, really overly engaged and preoccupied with, how do I get this connection? So whereas the avoidant type is more, I can do without this person. The anxious is, I cannot live without this person and I must go to any lengths to try to keep this connection established. So those are the difference in those two insecure attachment styles. Meg, you want to hit on secure and disorganized? Or?
Yeah, actually, do you mind if I add a few more things on that? So one of the books that we'll share that is called The Power of Attachment, and it's by Diane Poole Heller, and we'll make sure we drop all these in the chat before we get off. Talks about factors. So I'll do the first two, like factors that can contribute to the avoidant attachment and the anxious attachment. So if we have caregivers, I'll start with avoidance. So if we have caregivers who, or maybe we were more isolated and then we just didn't have their presence, like there was more of a lack of a presence. There may have been maybe even not as secure, like there's not a lot of the hugging and the physical connection. There may have been just like the emotional neglect. Like some of those can contribute to us feeling more of avoidant. Like we're kind of like, we feel like we're kind of on our own. Like there was no connection. And so, back to the Ainsworth study, the avoidance actually looked like the babies who still played and didn't respond when the mothers came back in. Mm-hmm. And originally, I think the researchers thought, oh, they coped well, like they must be doing well. But when they, researched their levels, the cortisol levels were high. Like these babies were actually in a lot of distress. But what happens with avoidance is we actually kind of shut down as a protective mechanism. And that is because we don't have that connection. And I'm just going to kind of follow along these lines because I know there is so much, but other things that look like that was the disassociation. So for someone who has the avoidant attachment, it kind of goes with the dorsal, like we zone out. It's hard for us to be in conversation. So if I'm someone who leans toward the avoidant side, it feels unsafe for me to be connected with you because I don't trust that connection because I'm just afraid that you're going to leave. And so I basically kind of check out because that my body is telling me that is safer than trying to be connected. And, I would have difficulty with even just holding eye contact with you if I was someone who was more avoidant. And like you said, I just thought it was an interesting point, like that whole left brain orientation. Like if we're on a more avoidant side, we're more analytical, we're more factual. We get overwhelmed when conversations are too deep and too much and people talk too much. Again, we kind of have this feeling where we need to just check out. It just becomes too much. And if we're someone, and we're going to go through ways to become more securely attached, but if we're someone who is more avoidant, one of the things that we can do is learn to be more physically embodied. So if I find myself, I'm in conversation with you, Erin, and we're trying to connect, but I feel myself checking out. My body just does it automatically. It goes into a protective, like, I disassociate kind of. The practice is to learn to be physically embodied. So to bring myself back to the present so I can feel and stay tolerable steps, to be able to connect with you. And if you know someone, like if you are in a relationship with someone who is the avoidant type. It's kind of just recognizing they're not trying to be dismissive. Like they're not trying to be rude when they check out. It actually may be something like their inherited attachment blueprint. Like they just go into a safety mode of I feel better when I withdraw. So being able to, I think, just kind of recognize that, because for an avoidant person, it takes a lot of energy for them to connect. So that's one side. And then the ambivalent, did you have anything before I jump to the next one?
Well, I thought
the avoidant piece.
An example right quick. I mean, I think real life examples always help us kind of see that. Some of you are probably already clicking, yep, I've been with a person like that. But I think about when we look at how our attachment style and what we experienced in childhood and then what it looks like now, I think about, you know, my husband, who is a more avoidant type. When he might be silent, that feels unsafe, because I think about maybe silent treatment or what happened in my childhood. So part of my adulthood is like registering a new information that when my husband's silent, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm in trouble or I'm being punished. That actually is just he likes more silence and solitude and isolation. So where maybe early in my marriage, if there was that silence, I would be all anxious, like, oh, what did I do? But as I develop a more secure attachment, I'm comfortable more so with his silence and not being sensitive to that. So I just thought good opportunity to share an example of how that childhood and how that patterning can happen and how we develop that secure attachment in our adulthood to get new information to ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. And what's beautiful about that too is that we have our original blueprint, but there's that whole idea like the corrective experiences. So you sort of attach new memories and new relationships and developing relationships in with that, your own experiences. So, you know, if you have the experience of someone who's like, if I get the silent treatment, that means I'm cut off in a relationship, and that feels scary and threatening to you, the more positive experiences you can have of people you deeply care about that maybe lean toward the side of like quiet and withdrawal, and learning to not feel threatened by that becomes like new encoding with the original blueprint. And so it can maybe even be like less triggering for you. I kind of have similar experiences, not in the marriage part, but just feeling like if I do something wrong, there's going to be a disconnect. I'm going to be shut out. And, you know, so it's, yeah, but it's really cool that we're not stuck there, right? We're not stuck there. So thanks for sharing. Okay, so let's maybe give some examples, or I would just want to do a little bit more on the anxious based off this Diane Poole-Heller, because I think she does a great job describing some of the things. So a few of the relational contributors that might create this anxious, she calls it ambivalent, so anxious ambivalent attachment. You know, as children, we don't know who's going to show up, whether our needs are going to be met. We grow up with like this particular kind of anxiety. And we may even have loving parents at times, and it can be mixed with like unpredictability. It can be inconsistent. So sometimes they may show up as loving and safe, and sometimes our parents themselves are like dysregulated and anxious and bring their own kind of like trauma or emotions or whatever it is to the relationship. So it's very inconsistent in that sense. And as you mentioned, like, so there may be, when we lean toward this anxious side, there's a lot of departure stress. When people leave, we get scared because that doesn't feel safe to us. We go into like this sympathetic fight flight sort of thing. And so we, it's like, I'm trying to think of a good example. If you were a child and your parent is sort of like sometimes loving and sometimes inconsistent, and you're starting to develop this anxious attachment, you have a stress response that kicks on this fight flight. And so in order to be connected, because remember, this is like our primal need, like we want to be connected to our caregivers. Our fight flight might look like, I'm going to show a lot of like emotion or anger or drama or something, because at least and then I get the attention and that makes me feel connected, right? So if like we can draw up a lot of high energy, anxiety, and whatever is in that fight flight response, then that at least still connects me to you because you see me, you're paying attention to me when I'm doing that. There's like a need for reassurance, and I'm not sure I have anything else to add on that, the anxious part, but those were just a few tidbits that came to mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and what that can look like then later in life, an example maybe many can relate to, either through yourself or what you've heard somebody describe, that the avoidant person is going to be the ghoster that doesn't reply to a text or a call for minutes, days, or weeks. The anxious attachment style is going to be the person that's calling like 10 times, answer the phone, answer the phone, answer the phone, texting, I can't believe you're not responding, I can't believe you know. So those are just a quick way as to how those would look different, you know, the avoiding altogether versus that hyper, I need you to respond to me now. You can all decide which one you identify with next.
Yes. It's so funny because I feel like all of them, you know, and it's really interesting. And I don't know the answer to this. This could be a really great discussion point. Is like there are some people that we like when you say ghost, I'm like, yes, ma'am, I do that too. Like that really resonates with me. And then there are times when I think of like the anxious style. It's more like I need to control. I need to be in control of the situation. And I probably am even like that more in my parenting style. Right. And so I'm like, yep, that's me too, you know, so like maybe trying to create friendships and make friendships, I might lean toward one way, you know, maybe in a mothering role, I lean toward another way, in my marriage, another way. So I think I'd be curious, you know, this maybe a different discussion or at the end of like different roles, different styles. Just a thought, but.
Well, and I think that really leads in to the disorganized style, right? Because sometimes one way works and sometimes another way works. And when you have a very unpredictable parental caregiver, and I guess I just should have said this to start with, but just side note, we'll add in now kind of a warning label. I mean, I know we're talking about a lot of childhood stuff, and many of us have had childhood trauma, that some of this information could be rather triggering too. So just, I feel like when I'm listening to a podcast, often you might hear warning label, we're going to be talking about something that could be upsetting. And I guess just pointing that out, that as we talk about some of these experiences, depending on where you are in your healing journey, it could be really traumatizing, re-traumatizing to kind of think back to that and identify how that was for you. So just putting that out there. I know many of you might already have therapists that you're talking to this stuff about with, but certainly take care of yourself through this. And if you feel yourself like, you know what, I am not ready to be hearing about this, feel free to dip off at any moment you need, and know that it'll be recorded if you want to come back to it later. But because I think with the disorganized attachment style, there is a lot more childhood trauma where you just didn't know what to ever expect. Maybe you come home and everybody's nice. Maybe you come home, everybody's breaking down the house, like somebody's drunk, somebody's missing, somebody, you know, like that disorganized, there's no stability and I don't know what I'm going to get, leads to that more, you know, highly insecure attachment style that is labeled as this disorganized. So that's where the relationship itself is dangerous and not safe. And so just the level of fear is very high. The likelihood of going to shut down is higher. Maybe you're just hunkering down in the closet and hoping nobody sees you. So I think being that maybe different roles, different things, I think sometimes we learn that because maybe we had an avoidant dad and an anxious mom, and we had to play the middle. I mean, I think so many times we are that seesaw of how do I help the house function? What do I need to be? Do I need to be this? Do I need to be that? And I think some of that hyper attention to others is where that really highly sensed person gets in that disorganized style where it's just, I don't even know how to be, and I don't know what consistency is. Everything's chaotic. So maybe it's a time to kind of lead into talking some more about that, as I know you've got some other information to share about that style too.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to pop up the handout so we can show the last two?
Yeah. And I know my notes kind of came from a talk I attended, and your notes came from your book. So you probably have some additional notes, and I know we'll include them all in our.
Yeah. Listen, guys, all these 14 pages of notes. It was so amazing, but now they're all over. I tried to number them, but okay, I give up on that.
Yeah,
I mean, the
predictable reaction to the separation, reunion, this extreme distress, or no reaction at all is kind of what stands out to me. But yeah, you go ahead.
Well, I think with the disorganized, I think what can be helpful is being familiar with your nervous system, because, you know, as one of the things I was trying to say in the beginning was sometimes understand where we are in our nervous system. It tells us what our attachment style is. And so if we're sort of in that freeze, shut down state where we're numb, we're disassociating, we're checked out, we're apathetic, there's just this low, you know, energy and motivation. And then sometimes we're feeling panicky and anxious and clingy, and, you know, we're more mobilized in some ways. I think that can be a really good signal. And then so once we know how we are feeling within our bodies, if we are feeling more frozen when we're trying to connect with someone, what small steps that feel tolerable to our system, because if we go do too much, too fast, too big, we shut down because it doesn't feel safe. So what can we do that are small steps to help us slowly engage? So I'm looking over here because you're on my screen over here, but it might be, you know, just trying to even look at your eyes for like a second, right? Like just learning to feel that it's safe to connect to you. And again, you're just learning these new experiences because you are creating new experiences and new memories. So if you come from a very chaotic, unsafe household that makes relationships feel like they are not safe for you, you can have corrective experiences with people who are maybe more securely attached, people who that you can feel connected to, that are in attunement with you, that listen to you, that help you feel safe. And you build these connections slowly by helping your body feel safe with them. And that creates new imprints for your, not only your nervous system, but your attachment style. And then you can almost learn to reparent yourself to be more securely attached to yourself. So you're learning to self-regulate, you're learning to co-regulate. Self-regulate means like being able to kind of like safely be with your experiences. So you're not checking out and you're not becoming overly, like you're able to be there in a way that feels good enough inside. And so if you have enough corrective experiences, like you can learn to be more securely attached with somebody else. Did that make sense?
Yes, 100%. The notion of the disorganized attachment being that really any relationship is scary. You can imagine that developing a secure attachment is going to be really hard for that individual. I mean, it's hard for all insecure attachment types, but particularly for this disorganized attachment style. So often there is unresolved trauma, and often, this corrective reparenting type you're talking about may be done in therapy, where you're really doing some trauma work on what your experience has been, and feeling the safety of a therapy room with the eye contact with someone that you can trust, that can help guide you through some, okay, maybe I can trust somebody. I mean, I can think about how often maybe as a therapist, I've been told I can't trust anyone, but this, I can't trust, nowhere feels safe but here. And I think that's particularly when you have that disorganized attachment style that maybe is in a insecure relationship in their adult life too, and nothing felt safe and nothing feels safe. And so just establishing safety is, I think, one of those basic things. I'm sure we'll get into when we're talking about how to develop the secure attachment. But anything else about disorganized attachment before we kind of add just some more content about the secure attachment that you wanted to add in?
No, I think we touched on a lot of it.
Yeah, so maybe one of us on here is a secure attachment. I don't know. But I think I've met some before in my life, maybe. What would you say about secure attachments, Meg? And
well, so to starters, when I think about it from a baby's perspective first.
You want this hand out still, or you?
I'm good. Whatever, if it's helpful for people to have okay, we'll take it off. I mean, with this, if you think about it from when you are an infant and you don't know how to regulate, you cry and you're upset, and your caregivers are the ones who we hope would meet our needs. And if a caregiver who is securely attached can come in and really be in like alignment with what you need, they rock you, they nurse you, they hug you, they feed you, they change you, they help you fall asleep, they look at you, they love you, whatever it is, that they don't become like consistently distressed when you are distressed. Like sometimes we, if we are parents, we know that sometimes we do become a little distressed when our kids are distressed. But like if you are consistently showing up securely with your child will learn, like, I am safe. I have someone who can help me feel safe. I have someone who can meet my needs. The world feels safe. And then we can bring that into our adult relationships. We may be more trusting of people. We may find it easier to connect with people and be present. And again, like engage, like if I'm someone who had a lot of like that physical touch or eye contact as a child, and it was a safe experience, being able to maybe bring that into my adult experiences. And so we're just more in attunement. And I guess, within the nervous system, we're in that vagal response, right? Like we can experience the joy and the connection and the playfulness and the love and all of that. So, and one of the things, I don't have the stat in front of me because I do want to emphasize, it's not that we had to experience secure attachment 100% of the time. Actually, I feel like I remember reading that percentage could be fairly low. Like we can still become securely attached adult, or like, it's not that our parents had to be like that all the time.
Yeah, they didn't have to be perfect.
No, like there's a lot of times that, they aren't securely attached. We were humans. So we don't have to hit that mark all the time. It's just, was there a caregiver who we had who was mostly kind of grounded and securely attached?
Yeah, so I guess with that, I guess where would you want to go next? Do you want to go into how this can look in some relationships if there's a mix of these styles, or do you want to go into the kind kind of developing the secure attachment?
Yeah, so I just looked at the time. So I want to be mindful of people's times. I think my thought is give a few tangible tools and takeaways of, okay, I recognize, I see myself that I'm someone who leans more into anxious attachment, or I'm avoidant, or I'm a disorganized, or I'm a mix of both. I have all four. How can we bring more secure attachment into our lives, within us, and into our relationships? So again, that book, The Power of Attachment, we'll put all this info in the chat, and you'll get also an email with all of it. Provides like 12 ways. She calls them secure attachment skills. I won't go through all of them, but we can maybe go back and forth on a few of them. We'll leave the last one to be repair, because I think that's one of the biggest ones we can do for friendships, partners, and parenting. One that stood out to me, because this was just more, I realized I saw myself in this, so I'll share this one first, was be mindful in comings and goings. So our attachment systems are sometimes sensitive when people approach us, leave us, and what happens to our relationship with those transitions. So as you're listening to that, kind of be mindful, like, how do you feel when people come toward you? Maybe even physically. How do you feel when people approach you? And how do you feel when people leave you? If you were thinking about that, how do I feel if someone avoids me, or someone approaches me and I'm more an avoidant? I freeze up, right? If I am someone who is more anxious and someone leaves, I get clingy and I get really upset. I get nervous, right? So become mindful of how you feel when people approach you and when they leave. Do you avoid approaching others? Are you upset when they leave? And find ways to make the transitions register as more comfortable. So what came up for me was, what I noticed is, like, I like to have my very early morning, and I'll come upstairs and I'll have a cup of coffee, and I might listen to like a guided meditation or journal, or just do something, that's more like internal for me. That's really like a quiet time. But by the time I come down, my whole family is downstairs, and they're, chatting and blah, blah, they're a lot. And so when I would approach them at first, I found it to be like too much for my system. Like, it was just too much. And I kind of like would freeze up a little bit. And so what I have learned to do is actually, I just bypass the kitchen completely. And I give myself a little bit more transition time before I reunite with them. And so I will actually go then into my bedroom, and then I'll get ready for work, and give almost like a few extra minutes to ease into the transition of being around my family. Because if I went in too soon, it was just too hard. Like, I would get a little, like, something would happen in me, like I'd freeze or get grumpy. So I think just be really curious about, how do you feel when people approach you or you approach people? And how do you feel when you leave or people leave? And how can you make that transition easier for you? So if maybe you were anxious and someone was leaving, is there a ritual or something you could do, or even be able to verbally, if this is someone you could actually talk to about this, when you leave, I am anxious, is there something we can do so that I feel more settled? Like asking for their support, letting them know this is what you're experiencing. And maybe it is, an extra text message, or a longer hug, or whatever it would be. Or is there a way for you to learn to self-soothe? So I think just kind of experimenting what works for you in that area.
Yeah, love that. I mean, what was coming up for me as you were describing is, I think about how often maybe people, especially in therapy, I might, or as a person, a hugger or a not hugger, I mean, I think that's how we classify people a lot, as a person who likes physical touch or a person who doesn't. And I think understanding our needs, understanding our partner's needs or our children's needs, and what people's preferences are, having that awareness. And I think part of that developing the secure attachment is letting each other be what we are and being okay. But that communication about it, that understanding another person's needs is a big part of that developing this secure attachment.
Right, right. Because it was not that I don't want to see my family in the mornings, but there was something, physiologically going on. I was like, I'm not ready to
feel safe. And so that nervous system, our body speaks louder than our desire, intention, or what we know is best for the situation. And so if our body is frozen or clammed up or withdrawn, like, we can't hide that, so you're giving your body a chance to adapt to the situation that it inherently doesn't feel as safe. Maybe as a kid in the kitchen before school, it was a stressful time. What mood is mom in? What mood is dad in? What is happening? So that nervous system might just be primed for not feeling safe. And so you're listening to that and giving yourself ways to adapt and transition so that you are engaging and able to connect during that time, even though your body is not feeling safe in it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, quickly, I'll go through a couple other ones. I mean, some of it is more just listening deeply, the eye contact. She talks about doing more play with maybe a securely attached partner. And I think the main one that would be the most helpful is talking about the repair. So
there's so many good ones. Why don't you just kind of name them off before we get to that? Because I know
you mean name all of them? Okay.
I mean, practicing presence is kind of what you were just talking about, but that one, like being present, I mean, that is so valuable. And especially if you're feeling anxious or avoidant, it's hard to be present. So that eye contact, that I'm here, I see you, so important. But yeah, just hit a couple of those others that.
Okay. I'll go down the list, everybody. All right. So listen deeply, practice presence, attune, engage in joint attention. So this is if you're alongside someone, and it may just be like, I'm watching a movie with this person. I'm doing something with this person alongside of them. Maintaining contact, be mindful of the coming and going. So that's the one I just mentioned. Using your eyes, play, unautomate, repair, build and expand your resources. And then this last one is one that also really resonated with me personally, which was attend to the good. And so, we tend to be wired with that whole negativity bias. And so I think attending to the good and noticing the things that are working well, notice the things that feel good in small doses, and really this whole concept of learning to savor even like micro moments with people and small connections, and learning to be more with that and feel like, wow, I'm so grateful I'm in this moment with you, and allowing that to sit just a little bit longer and being really in tune with that helps with that negativity bias, because we can always think of like, this is going wrong and this is going wrong. And we get stuck in almost like what they would call the woundology concept. But if we can attune to what's going well, then that helps expand our secure attachment. It helps expand our sense of safety. It helps regulate our nervous system. So that was another one of my favorites.
Yeah, so with the repair, I know we were talking before we started, some of the research that I had that we have read about the with attachment, like there's this concept of rip and repair. So like in relationships, there will be rips, there will be breaks in attachment, there will be imperfections. The rips are inevitable. And that the repair work that happens after a rip actually strengthens and makes the attachment stronger than it was before. So in theory, you actually need some rips in order to have a stronger, more secure attachment. So I find that the hope in that is that, back to what you said about we don't have to perfectly parent, like if they get it right, I think it was like 30% of the time or something like that.
That's right, 30,
yeah. To have a secure attachment. And so if you think about every fight and makeup that you've been in a relationship, You know, sometimes you might say, oh, we just fight so much. I don't even know if this is worth it. But the repair work, if you are doing the repair work and not just ignoring it and brushing it under the rug, you're actually learning more about each other, connecting better with each other. And down the road, you see this stronger bond and connection because there's been the rip and repair. And so I just find like a zipper, it's like each rip and repair, like zipping up a zipper. And you can imagine seeing a zipper kind of zipped up halfway, all the way, like that fully zipped up zipper to that very secure attachment to where this isn't coming open. It's like that really can be the end result of a relationship that has gone through some opportunities of that disconnect and that reconnect and that coming back stronger. And, you know, so I just think the repair work is really valuable to talk about, because I think people can get really discouraged when there has been rips in their relationship because of attachment wounding that has, you know, affected the connection. So I really kind of love that aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a really hopeful message for me when it came to parenting. And, you know, because there's always just this fear, like the worry of how I impact my kids, right? And no, being able to go back, like, okay, they have this blueprint because I show up with my parenting with my own stuff and parent from some of the unresolved stuff and some healing stuff, and being able to repair it with them and be like, hey, what actually just happened wasn't about you, it was about me, because maybe I was just reacting from a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have the original kind of memory of our experience of a rip, and they have the repair memory that can come alongside of it. And I think whether that's through parenting, whether that's through, you know, an intimate relationship, whether that's with a friendship, then you can be able to experience both. I think that's a very hopeful message.
Yes.
In that, like, we can create new memories and new experiences and new wiring alongside the rip. It doesn't have to stay a rip.
Yeah. Yes. And that reparenting piece that we actually talked today in the self-care toolkit share that I did at noon. The information, I know Happy Days was a book of last year that I feel like a lot of people who know me may have read, but she talked about, I think it's Levine's or Siegel's, one or the other, the 4 S's in reparenting. And I just kind of want to say those so that people who look at the recording can think back to this and maybe think about how you can apply this to yourself and your relationships. But they talked about the 4 S's being safety, so being safe, being seen, being soothed, and being secure. And so if you think about nurturing and that reparenting, it's like, how am I offering that to myself? How am I finding safety? How am I, you know, making sure I'm seen? How am I soothed? How am I secure? And how am I offering that to my children? And if I'm in a parenting relationship or in my romantic relationship. So I just love those 4 S's. And I wanted to share those. And then also, make sure that those of you who did the How to Do the Work book study this past year, there's really good information on all this that we talked about in that. I just looked back at the reparenting chapter today myself and looked at those pillars of that they talk about in that for reparenting, which are very helpful. So you can reference back to it. And again, coming next week is Nicole Apira's How to Meet Yourself book and workbook, which some of you have gotten and are planning to come to the book study. So that too has some helpful information along this line, especially with regulating our nervous system and feeling safe, seen, and understanding these habituated patterns that we get in, and how to develop new patterns. So, and I know I had read in preparation for this Attached, which was a recommended reading for a course I took on attachment wounds, Amir Levine and Rachel Heller, Attached. And then Meg read The Power of Attachment by Diane Heller. pool healer. So anyhow, we'll have all those in the email notes about this tonight. I just wanted to make sure that I spoke to those. And then some of you also have, it will be up for registration, the relational trauma recovery group that I'm going to do retreat style, talking about healing from attachment wounds. It's going to be March 3rd. So look for that on our website if you're interested in attending an intense group about that. So I wanted to share those couple of things and have them on the recording. Anything you want to share, Meg, before we unrecord and see if there's any questions or answers? I don't see any questions in the chat yet. While we're closing up the recording, be sure if you don't want to talk in person, you can put anything in the chat. And if you want to get ready to talk in person, we'll be around for that too afterwards. Any closing words from you, Meg?
Yeah, no, I'm open to open up the chat. And as we're doing that, I'm going to find the links to put in the chat for everybody with the different books and podcasts, if anybody's interested.
Very good. Thank you all for joining us. Hope this was helpful to get you thinking about your attachments and finding secure attachments in your relationship.